everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Conversations, the show where we have conversations that we think more people should be having conversations about. That's a wide variety of topics. And today we have a really interesting topic because I'm sure there's going to be some things that come out in the conversation today where you're like, ooh, I thought like that. I didn't even know I thought like that. And this is what we're here to bring to you as part of the conversation series. So as a reminder for all of you who are watching us live, please say hello, hop in the chat, and we really want you to be part of the conversation as well. So as we go through the topic of today, which I'm going to announce in a minute, please share your thoughts, your experience, your questions, your insights, anything that's coming into that lovely brain of yours. We would love to know about it. And hello, Eric from Scotland. It's Friday evening, so I always appreciate people who are joining us on Friday night when they could be socializing with other people. I'm glad that you think that we're your people. Okay, so our topic for today is something that I don't want to say that it's necessarily highly debated, but there's been a lot of talk about it for a very long time. And now perhaps maybe we have a new way of looking at it, which is why I'm very excited to have Joe here with me today to talk about executive presence. And we're going to talk about what is executive presence, what is your definition of executive presence, what makes something executive, how people define this on different levels. Maybe your boss defines it differently as you and is not very helpful in helping you understand these types of things. So we're going to talk through everything executive presence today. And so again, I encourage you guys to share your thoughts, comments, ideas, insights, questions in the chat, and we will pull those over into the conversation. And to join me in this conversation, because I can't very well have a conversation by myself, is the phenomenal Joe Kwon. So Joe, can you give us a little bit of an introduction to who you are, what you're all about, and why is executive presence so important to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks everyone, and for Tracy's audience for joining. So my name is Joe Kwon. I go by the connection counselor. It's a little bit of a pun because I'm a lawyer by training, and I find the connection that you have with people makes an outsized impact on your career, your results, and just your life in general. So what I try to do is try to unearth real ways that you can leverage those connections for more success. And executive presence is just a huge one, right? And the way I came about thinking about executive presence is what happens to a lot of people is they get to kind of like the mid-level or upper levels, and then they can kind of get stuck a little bit, right? And they don't understand why. And either they could go to their boss or their boss could come to them and say, you need to work on your executive presence, right? This conversation is happening in offices or virtually everywhere across America and in other countries. So then what happens? You ask your boss, well, what do you mean by that? What should I work on? And they can't really explain it, right? Or they tell you something that's their definition, but it doesn't really work for you. It's not authentic to who you are. So then you end up kind of getting stuck. Hey, Balwinder, you end up kind of getting stuck because you can't do or get more of something if you don't understand what it is. And executive presence, as Tracy mentioned, it's a little bit debated and elusive. The way I think about it is, let's say you know someone who's an amazing singer or an amazing athlete, and you say, well, how do you sing well? They may not be able to actually communicate to you in a meaningful way so you can sing as well as them, right? So what I've come upon is a definition and a way to think about executive presence that actually will help you generate more executive presence. The reason I came up with it is when I started thinking about this for my own career, I could not find anything useful or practical that I thought would actually help me. So I started thinking about it myself and came up with a process. So it's a little bit about me, Tracy.
Yeah, this is awesome. And it's one of my favorite things for people. I feel like we all have different interests, right? And when we go and we dive down into the things that are interesting for us, I think this happens to a lot of people where we don't find what we're looking for. And so we have to go and explore. We have to go and create. We have to experiment. We have to hypothesize. And we have to figure it out so that we can fill that gap for ourselves, which is interesting for me because this is what I did with my community. And it's exactly what you did with your research on executive presence, Joe. So you can't just leave us hanging like that. You come up with this way for people that helps more people understand what executive presence is and what it looks like. So share with us that. What are the important things we need to know about what executive presence actually is?
All right. And hey, Brian, it's great to see you there as well. And Eric. So I'm going to break it down in a way. We'll get to the definition in just a moment, but I'm going to break it down into two parts, which will really help everyone who's listening. So the first thing is you go right to the words, right? Executive presence. So the first thing we need to think about is what is an executive? Like fundamentally, why are some people executives and some people not in terms of the work they do? Like not like how they got there, but like what is an executive asked to do that is different than other people? So if folks have comments or ideas in the chat, would love to hear from you. So that's the first thing to think about, like what makes an executive. So Tracy, I'll ask you while others are thinking, what do you think defines someone who's an executive?
It's funny because the first thing that comes to my mind is a suit. Like they wear a suit and they sit in a big office, right? Which actually has nothing to do with what an executive does.
Yeah.
But when you ask me that question,
Sure.
What is an executive? That's what comes to my mind. And I think that's really interesting, especially from like an entrepreneurial perspective, because as an entrepreneur, we may or may not consider us executive, even though most of us are CEOs, if you look at it that way, running our own businesses. And I've decided I don't like wearing suits and I have a home office, right? So then you get this like break point of what is an executive and what you are, because this is my definition. So yeah, I'd love to hear other people's definitions of executives as well. Like what does executive mean to you? So while we wait for those chats to come in, Joe, what about presence?
Yeah. So well, let's stick with executive just for one more moment because it'll make more sense. So in terms of, I just want to comment on your excellent response there, Tracy, when you said you thought of like a suit and you thought of someone sitting in the office. And I think that's kind of where we can steer ourselves wrong in a way as we think about how to generate more. And this is where a lot of advice comes from. They take someone who is an executive already, right? Who's recognized as an executive, right? And it's like they zoom in on them and then say, what's similar about this person? And what's similar about other people like them? And they look at things like, oh, what kind of car do they drive? Are they tall? Are they good looking? What's their voice like? What do they wear? Right? And what I like to say about this is the trappings are just the wrappings, right? It doesn't actually generate executive presence. It's just kind of a culture or a way people try to signal it, and it can be helpful. But have you ever talked to anyone who was in a suit who you didn't trust at all to lead anything? Right? That person has no executive presence. So you're not Superman, right? You can't put on the cape and all of a sudden become an executive. You actually have to be able to generate executive presence. So just to close up on the executive point, and then we'll move to the presence piece. The word executive comes from the root exequi, which means to carry out, right? So you're an executive because you get stuff done. That's why you're an executive, because you're the one in charge of either yourself or other people, whether it's, in the company or vendors or whatever, to move things from point A to point B. That's why executives are at a higher level than just regular workers, because the regular worker, it's like, what do I need to do? Someone tells them, they just do their job, right? An executive has to figure out what's going on with everyone else, if there are problems, how to get things done, and can't just say, oh, I'm just going to write my emails and everything gets done. They have to deal with the world and everything changing. So that's the first piece, right? So executive presence means this person feels like someone who would do that thing. And then the second piece is presence, right? So it's not executive doing, it's executive presence. So when we talk about executive presence, it's when you walk into a room, what do people feel about you, right? Do they feel like you're someone who knows what they're talking about and should follow? or do they feel, I'm not so sure, right? So let me ask you a question, Tracy. So if you walk into a room and someone's really sad, right, and they're down for whatever reason, they haven't said anything to you. They're not dressing in like garbage bags or anything. They're just dressed like a normal person, right? Can you sense that they're sad without them talking to you, making eye contact, or wearing garbage bags?
Absolutely. Although
How?
I don't know that in particular people wear garbage bags when they're sad. But we'll just go with it. So no.
How do you
can
know?
sense
How do you
that
know
they're
though? How do you know? They didn't use any words. How do you know?
Yeah, it's like the thing that came to me even when you said it's not about doing, it's about being, right?
Mhm.
How are they being? Are their shoulders hunched? Are they avoiding eye contact? These are like activities of how you're being when you're sad, right? Like when I'm sad, I don't want to talk to anybody. I want to just sit there and be sad and look down. And I'm not that type of person all the time, clearly, not in this moment, but that it's like it's a feeling based, it's emotional based, and it's like emotional triggers that get hit. So I'm sure it's the same with executive presence.
Yeah. So as human beings, right, part of our survival capability, if there's a large dude in a bar and he's having a bad day, right? I'm not gonna, if I have to have him say to me, hey Joe, I'm having a bad day, just back off. That's not good for my survival, right? So part of my survival as a human being is say, whoa, big angry dude, don't bother him, or leave and come back later to get a drink or whatever, because this is a danger situation, right? So
Mhm.
you don't have to teach people the skill of reading what's going on in a room. We have that from our earliest ages, right? It's a survival thing, right? Even as a baby, we start to develop that and sense that. So when you put the two together, executive presence, now you start to see a little bit more what it's about and why it's so hard to define, right? Why does someone feel that you are like an executive, right? Regardless of what your title is, because you don't need a title to have executive presence. You could be a busboy and have huge executive presence, right? Or you could
Mhm.
be a CEO. I've known like VPs and directors who are amazing at their job, but if they get up in front of a crowd and try to like talk or, do something extemporaneously, it's like a disaster. It's like,
Mhm.
it's just not good. I mean, everyone's seen that happen, right? So a title doesn't buy it for you. Money doesn't buy it for you. You brought up the point earlier, Tracy. It's just state of being, right?
Mhm.
It's how you are inside, and people feel like, wow, this person really seems to be the type of person that knows what's going on. So that brings me to the definition. And if you just take away one thing from this, talk, it would be this definition that I've come up with: executive presence.
Mhm.
Executive presence is the ability to inspire confidence that you can lead well in a given situation. I'll say it again. Executive presence is the ability. It's an ability. It's not an inborn trait, although maybe some people have more confidence from a younger age, but it's an ability to inspire what? Confidence that you, not the other person, you can lead well, right? Not in everything, but in this situation right now. You and I are in a situation right now. Do you feel like I know what I'm talking about? Or you're like, oh man, I'm really regretting having this person on the show, right? That's all that matters for executive presence. This moment, not yesterday, not tomorrow. It's like right in this moment. Are people like, yeah, we should keep listening, or are they hanging up?
Mhm. This is interesting because I feel like I've never really thought about this before, but when I have conversations with people, that's probably one of the main drivers behind me inviting them to be on this show, is that they
Mhm.
have that executive presence. They're going to show up, they're going to help people, they're going to know what they're talking about because I'm going to pick a topic that's related to them. And we're going to go with that. I think that these are the like fun realizations I think come about in these conversations because you don't really think like I've never thought about that before, and it's really cool. Eric has this comment too. Executives carry the weight of fiduciary
Mhm.
responsibility. It's Friday afternoon. My words stopped working. Managers and some directors are dealing with a localized budget when the executive is looking at these and balancing the shareholders' expectations. So another definition of executive, and
Yeah.
some of the doing that executives do. But I think it's really interesting, again, even to look at the I can't say fiduciary today. Sorry, everybody.
It's a hard word on a Monday even.
Money things. When it comes to money things, there's people that you trust with money, and there's people that you don't trust with money. And it's funny because I used to date a banker, and I was like, how are you so bad with money? You're a banker. Like, you should just be good with money, right? But not all bankers are good with money. And there's like, I was like, there's a lot of people who trust you with their money, and you're not very responsible with money. I'm not really sure how this is working. But that's the thing, right? You can have the responsibility, and that still doesn't necessarily mean that somebody trusts you to do that thing.
Well, let me put a finer point on that, and thanks for that comment, Eric, to stimulate this part of the conversation. We want to be very clear. Having executive presence does not mean you're good at your job. Does not mean you deserve a promotion. It doesn't mean you're even competent. All it means is the person in front of you believes that you're going to do a great job, right? That's all it means. Now, that could be true. It could be partially true. It could be true in a year. It could never be true, right? But there's a difference. We're talking about executive presence. We're not talking about your final performance. Now, the key here, though, is I wonder, do you even get a chance to prove you can do it, or a chance to fail without executive presence? Because what I would say, and what I've seen happen to a lot of people, especially as you head towards like the middle levels and it gets kind of rarefied air, no one takes a risk on you just because you've been at the firm for however many years, just because you're their friend or you've been loyal. If they don't believe, if they have to expend political capital and they don't believe that you're going to be able to do the next level, guess what? It would be kind of career suicidal for them to take that risk, right? That's like going beyond generous, right? That's just like gambling, right? So it's very important to sort of distinguish that executive presence is a skill and it's helpful, but I distinguish it from actually being competent. There's plenty of extremely competent people with zero executive presence. Doesn't mean they shouldn't get the promotion, but it may be difficult for them because people don't see them for their ability because it's not there, and vice versa.
Okay, so all of this has this flashing light in my head going, sales. It's almost like this ability to sell your competence. Is that something you would agree? One, is that something you would agree with? And two, for those people who are kind of paralyzed by the thought of selling themselves, what are some of the ways we can start to tweak our understanding of this, or other words that we can use to say that, okay, it's not related, it's separate from competence, and I can have competence, or I could not have competence and I could sell myself really well. And I'm sure we've all experienced those people where you're just like, wow, yes, that person. And then you're like, ugh, this was just a good sales job.
So it's a great point, and definitely something we need to cover today for this to be a complete sort of helpful discussion, which is how do you generate executive presence? And what I would say is you're not selling it, you're not convincing them, right? What it actually is, it goes back to the presence, and the presence you have in a situation. So I've come up with an easy shorthand. It's called the 6 degrees of executive presence. They're different states of being. So I'll just rattle them off real quick. Being proactive, being resolute, having equanimity, having stillness when you need to be still, being engaged, and having confidence yourself, right? Now, you're never going to have all 6 of these at once, right? The way it works is you're in a situation, let's say Tracy and I are on a boat and a yacht or something, and the boat got a hole in it, hit an iceberg like the Titanic, it's sinking. Okay. So I don't know about you. I'm not a sailor, right? I actually can barely swim. And, unless you were on the Coast Guard or something, I don't think you have the expertise to know what to do. So you and I are looking for help, right? So let's say there's a boat hand, right? Or the captain of the boat. And from a logical perspective, they are the person we should be listening to, right? Now, ask yourself, if they're really calm, right, and they've prepared for this and say, listen, everyone, the lifeboats are over here, walk in an orderly manner, blah, 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 look for, our ship hands, they'll have orange vests on. If you have any questions, if you have any small children, you feel like, wow, right? Ship is sinking, but I'm glad this person, this captain, right, is in charge. Now, think of a different captain. Like, remember that Italian captain when the boat sank off of Italy? And he like fell into the lifeboat, right? Imagine that guy, right? You run into that guy and he's like, I got to talk to someone. I got to go. Go over there, right?
Yeah.
He's the captain, right? But his state of being, his fear, his lack of sort of engagement and caring about the people who are under his care, which are all the people on the ship, right? That's like a law, like a maritime law, right? The captain has to take care of all those passengers, right? If that's not there, doesn't matter what your title is. And vice versa, you could be someone who doesn't have any official designation for the ship. You don't have a fancy uniform, cap, bars, but maybe you were in the Coast Guard or something, and you see that there's a vacuum and you say, everyone, please proceed this way. And you're calm and you're helping people and you're answering questions. Now people are like, yeah, let's listen to this person because the captain's a joke. I mean, he fell into the lifeboat over there. He's on dry land. What are we supposed to do? Right? So that's kind of the key, that the executive presence is generated from the presence that you bring in a specific situation. What's the thing that would actually lead people to believe that they should follow you?
Mm-hmm. It's funny because for whatever reason, it's making me think of the scene in Harry Potter when
Mm-hmm.
there's a troll in the dungeon and everybody's at like the Halloween feast and there's like, there's a troll in the dungeon, and everybody's like, ah, and Dumbledore's like, silence, you're gonna do this, you're gonna do this.
Yeah.
Dumbledore, you guys, just Dumbledore. Eric is sharing some more about a key differentiator being that execs carry the weight and don't push it across to the team. And that the weight of the responsibility is invisible to the team and the external world. And I think that is really I think this is true. And I would love to talk about this on the executive presence level, because when we look at things that way, it can make us feel like I have to carry all of the load. And for a lot of leaders that I talk to, like, we're just all humans as well, right? Mm-hmm. Like, we have personal struggles, we have emotions, we have feelings, right? And when our job is to make all of that, it's not that it's to make that invisible, it's that we are making, I don't even want to say that it's covering it up. It's that the thing that rises to the top is inspiring confidence, right? So it's not that I know every single thing I need to do in any given situation, because no human knows that, right? Mm-hmm. But it's that I'm here. I will take care of you. I have a priority of taking care of you. I have a desire to take care of you. And your the inspiring confidence rises above that feeling of carrying the weight.
Yeah, it's a bit of a stereotype or like a plot device. But if you think about any sort of war movie where they have the fancy, just graduated from academy officer, right? Green,
Maverick,
really, behind the ears.
Maverick.
Yeah. And, as soon as bullets start flying or bombs start going off, they just do not know what to do. Who does everyone turn to? The salty, battle-hardened sergeant, right? Non-commissioned officer who's been through 3 wars, led several people. He can't be at the level of, the captain because he doesn't have the education, right? That's the way it works in the military. But when the bullets start flying and the chips are down, who are people really going to rely on, especially if the captain is not giving orders with executive presence? They may actually ignore or pretend that they didn't hear those orders because they don't want to get killed, right? But anything the sergeant says, they'll be like, oh yeah, right? And if the captain's smart and if they don't know what they're doing, they will ask the sergeant for advice and then give the order, rather than, say something just to make it up because they have to and then get people like injured or worse. So, that's the thing. It's like that feeling and that awareness. It's an enabler, right? If you do have the ability, right, it may not be of any use if people don't feel it, if people don't want to follow you, right? So that can really hurt your career. And I think where a lot of people get stuck, and I've been in this sort of rut myself from time to time, it becomes this meritocracy thing, right? Like if I just work harder, right? If I work longer hours or produce more, if my KPIs are better, then I will get what I deserve and I will move faster than the person who's behind me. Guess what? Life doesn't work that way, even in sales. All right.
Yeah.
So let's say you're in sales and you make the most money. However, you also offend the most people, are in a bunch of lawsuits because, sexual harassment or something else going on, or corruption, right? If your leaders have even an ounce of ethics and they see this problem, they're like, we can't promote this guy or gal, right? We can't promote them. Why will we promote them? We just be exposing them to more risk, having their bad habits affect more people, more junior people, right? Who may pick up these bad habits. It's going to sabotage. But from a purely numbers perspective, they may be like, well, why'd you promote the other person? I brought in twice as much income as them. Well, because that's not the only thing that matters.
Mm-hmm. And I think that is an important point too, right? Being very clear on what are the things that matter. I was chatting on another live earlier today we were talking about marketing KPIs specifically, but there's so much measuring of things that don't matter. Mm-hmm. And therefore, if you're only focused on, like, sure, I could only measure sales, right? Mm-hmm. But is that actually, on the grander scheme of things, what is best for everybody? And I think there's certain people who have a predisposition to leadership because of how they see relationships with people, because of how they value relationships with people. And when we look at a relationships with people level, then sales doesn't. I've known lots of salespeople who are like bully salespeople, who people are like, fine, I will buy this from you because I just want you to stop talking to me and I want you to leave me alone. Right? It's like the easier of two evils to just buy this from you. But it's like, it's not the best thing for the entire team at the end of the day. We have a really interesting question here from Eric too. Is executive presence anchored in charisma, linked to the nature or nurture conundrum?
Yeah, great question, Eric. And it's funny you asked that. I just gave a presentation on charisma to Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey just this week. And we did a deep dive on charisma because it's actually the first topic I started exploring in leadership. So what I can tell you about charisma is it's very similar to executive presence. There's one fundamental difference, right? They both have to do with how people feel and affecting how they feel about you or about themselves, right? So executive presence is more about how they feel about you for a specific purpose, to like get something done, right? That's the frame of executive presence. And you are creating that in the interaction. There's like an energy between myself and Tracy, and I'm informing that energy, and she is, and together she's like, wow, Joe knows, he's got executive presence. That's what's happening. With charisma, it's instead of a specific thing happening, it's what is the person's kind of emotional state and need, right? And what do they need? And can I, through our interaction, the same, energy beam between me and Tracy, can I impact it in a way that she is better off and closer to getting what she needs after talking to me or being around me than she would be otherwise? And that's why charisma is powerful, right? Let's say you're sad and you need to feel better. Let's say you're tired and you need some energy, right? Let's say you're doing great and you just want to keep feeling great. Who doesn't want to be around a person who continues to help you move towards the thing that you need? That's charisma. That's why charisma is so powerful. Big difference, though, is it's not specific to getting anything done. It's just more like internal within the person. Like, what do they need personally? Whereas executive presence, you can think of it more organizationally or more like project specific.
Mm-hmm. And so if we look at it from this nature versus nurture perspective as well, It's really interesting because that kind of drives that what my passion is, which is personal brands and your personal values and how they show up, that every single person has different values, different experience, which means every single leader also has different natural presence. And so I think a lot of time when we talk about charisma, when we talk about executive presence, there's this like definition that we have of like somewhat energetic, right? Energetic is one I would say, well-spoken, like, I don't know, anyway, but we all have our own definitions of it. But there's this like vision of what it's supposed to look like to have executive presence. And we kind of touched on this at the beginning as well. And so what are your thoughts on again, this kind of split? Like, you mentioned that it's ability, right? So it's not that you're born with executive presence. And I don't believe that it's that executive presence is meant to look one way. It's meant to make you feel one way. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Joe.
Yeah, great question. And thanks, Eric, for adding this to the conversation. So there are people who, without any training, without doing anything, will have more executive presence, and there are people who have less. And the way I explain that is it's not just a genetic DNA thing, although I'm sure there are aspects of that as well, just like how a tall person is going to, maybe be better at, jumping high. But there's also the aspect of how did you develop from your earliest years and respond to the stimulus around you, right? So if you were the type of person who had a certain environment, and in order to thrive or survive, depending on, how adverse it was, what were the skills that you developed and used over and over and over again to the point where it's like breathing, right? Some people can sense deception like a mile away, right? Because they needed that skill growing up. Other people, maybe they had a really, bless them, insulated life, right? And everyone was so trustworthy around them, they may not have needed to develop that skill, right? So there are certain skills that you will have naturally accumulated through your personality, through your reaction to things, through your DNA that will help you with things like executive presence. My point in calling it an ability is just because you can jump high doesn't mean you're going to become a great volleyball player or a great basketball player, right? There's abilities as well. And you can learn to jump higher with proper mechanics and, sort of better exercises, right? So executive presence, when you understand how it's generated, you can start to, one, frame things so you're working on the things that help, and then two, respond organically in a way that will help it rather than, oh, maybe am I wearing the wrong color tie, or they don't like this kind of car, I should switch cars and they'll think different of me, or my voice needs to be lower so I sound like an executive or something. All those things, they matter because they signal, but they don't matter because they're form, they're not substance. So they won't replace, let's just say, they won't replace the substance of what you need to have executive presence or charisma, as a matter of fact.
Right. And I think that, again, from the like personal branding perspective, it makes me think that if I was going to show up and say like, okay, a executive is tall with a low voice, then I'm going to show up and I'm going to talk like this. And I could do that, but then there's like this level of fakeness.
Oh yeah.
Me. And when it comes to like that charisma and the executive presence, I don't think that when people can smell fakeness on you, they're like, oh, confidence. I'm confident that you are going to do what I need you to do, because they can sense that you're not quite authentic. So I think it's important to explore, again, our definitions of what those are. Are we trying to change ourselves through that? Or are we trying to embrace the things that we can about ourselves and what does make us trustworthy, what does make us confident, and tap into those things in order to optimize our executive presence?
Yeah, I love where you're going with this, Tracy. And I've actually come up with a term for this. It's called the Tom Brady problem. You know Tom Brady?
I do know Tom Brady.
I think most people know Tom Brady, right? So people assume someone who's going to be a great leader, quarterback, or even C-suite executive looks like Tom Brady, right? That's the world we live in, right? I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying like that's the frame. If you and I go into a conference room and it's you, me, someone in a wheelchair, a Black female, someone who's neurodiverse, and Tom Brady, and the company had to take a vote as to, who to be the leader just based on like that showing up, like without knowing any of our credentials, who's going to win by a landslide every time? Tom Brady, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to become Tom Brady, right? Like realistically, right? Like, sure, it'd be great to be him, right? But I don't want to change myself, right? I don't want to start training in football. I don't want to have plastic surgery or something. I could never be that tall or fast anyway. But in any case, I want to be me, and actually the best me available is what you were saying, Tracy. It's the authentic me. It's not Joe trying to be Tom. It's Joe being more of Joe. But there's a problem. And the problem is sometimes when you try to be you, people reject that because they don't value you the same way they value Tom Brady. So now I call it the dilemma, the diversity dilemma. Do I pretend to be more like Tom in ways that I can, right? And let's just use women and hairstyles, right? Like women with long, flowing, luxurious Pantene hair commercials, right, will maybe not be considered seriously as a leader. So what were a lot of women doing, especially like in the 80s when I was coming up? They were cutting their hair really short, like Marcy from Married with Children, right? And that's like, oh, that's what a female executive is like, short hair, maybe shoulder length, at the most. But long, flowing locks, come on, people won't take you seriously. Right. So it's kind of that aspect. And, one thing that I work on and teach is how do you solve for that dilemma? Because if you try to become Tom, even if you're successful, and a lot of people do this, right? They're successful at becoming a chameleon. One, you're hurting yourself, right? Because you're not you're not having integrity. And two, you're actually not delivering the best performance you could because you're delivering someone else's performance, which is not your performance. So you're losing out, and the company is actually losing out, although they don't realize it, right? Yeah. And then the other side of the spectrum is, well, what if I just be me and then I get totally rejected, right? So it's like, I wanted you to be authentic, Tracy, but not that authentic, right? Like, I only want you to be as authentic as I'm comfortable with. Like, what's that about, right? Like, but that's
not
reality,
really
right?
authenticity.
Yeah. So the missing key, the missing piece here, and this is super duper important, is when you have a high level of connection with a person, your authenticity becomes an asset. When you have disconnection with a person or no connection, your authenticity becomes a liability. You become other, you become annoying, you become different, right? You can be very different, but if you and I develop this great working relationship, all the things that I may have found of annoying become endearing, unique, special, diverse, interesting, right? Versus Tracy is insensitive, inconsiderate, rude, because it's not the way I would do it. What's the difference? You're the same person. The difference is our relationship, right? So people think that they can just be whoever they want and not have any connection with people, and everyone should be like, hallelujah, you're the best thing since sliced bread. It only works if you're Tom Brady. And that's a fact.
We're just not all going to be Tom Brady.
I like to live in the real world.
He has his
I find
haters
fantasizing
too, right?
about my career has never really helped it.
I think it's just, I love the Tom Brady dilemma because my husband is an NFL fan and he's a Tampa Bay fan. And when Tom Brady was in New England, he was like, Tom Brady. And then when Tom Brady was in Tampa Bay, he was like, damn it, I kind of have to like him now. He did win the cup. Anyway, so like, it's just funny. It makes me think of my husband. But okay, so there's one other important thing I want to talk about in terms of executive presence today, because so when I was very early on in my career, I worked for a really big company, and the CEO was like this giant man who, if he was a cartoon, I would write that his hair was like made of fire. Like he was always around like fuming at people, and he would get like really mad. And I remember sitting in an advertising meeting once and just watching him talk to like the director of e-com or something, and the director just being like, like it's like I watched him shrink in his chair, right? And so that was my first exposure to executive presence, and there was a lot of fear associated with that. Like it's kind of like you raise up the ranks and people are supposed to fear you. And so I just wanted to kind of, I mean, in my now, based on what I've seen and what I've experienced, that is not at all what it is. But I just wanted to talk briefly about the connection, or how do we need to break that connection between the concept of executive presence and creating fear beneath you.
So it's a great question. And if we're really honest, right, we all know people like that, right? Who we wouldn't want to work for, but they're wildly successful. They continue to be successful despite these sort of, let's just call them suboptimal ways of managing people, maybe not so HR friendly, right? But they continue to thrive and they continue to get results. Let's be honest, right? Like, you know,
his results, like on the fiduciary side,
yep,
insane, right? So like, it's understandable why he's in the role he's in, but it was, yeah.
Let me put a finer point on this great example that you've brought up, Tracy. Executive presence has no morality about it. Okay. All it means is people who are interacting with you think that you're going to move things from point A to point B, right? It doesn't mean they agree with it. It just means, gosh darn, I don't like you. It's kind of like Tom Brady, right? It's like, I don't like you, but I know you're going to do good things for our team, right? It's exactly that, right? So you can have executive presence through very negative kind of traits if they work to get the results. Now, is there damage that's done? Are there other consequences? Yes. So then the question becomes, as an organization, as the board, as people who manage like that leader, what are they willing to accept? What are their ethics and their values? Are they driven just by KPIs and results and say, wow, look, my 401k is looking better. I'm going to, meet the bumper on my bonus because this guy or gal is delivering, quarterly best results. And now I'm going to be put into another racket. I'm willing to let other people be the casualty of that. Right. But I know this person's going to do it. And if they're the person who's there, and I don't believe there's anyone else there who can do it as well, maybe who has a style that's more in alignment with my values, guess what? I'm just going to let it roll. Right. Unless I have some strong ethical compass that's going to make it impossible for me to do that. And I say, no, I'm going to hurt myself financially to be true to myself and maybe help the organization as a whole. Right. So that's a judgment that each person, I'm not judging. That's a judgment that each person needs to do for themselves moment to moment. And they need, I don't have to look at them in the mirror. They have to look at themselves in the mirror. And if they can get up and be fine with that, that's good. And if they can't, then, maybe they need to rethink sort of how they roll. But yeah, just to make that distinction, it doesn't mean you're competent, and it certainly doesn't mean you're good that you have executive presence if we just use good as a generic term.
Well, and I think so. One last thing then, if I am a young leader, not quite leader, but my goal is to be a leader, and this is the type of thing that I experience as executive presence, how do I explore okay, that's how that looks for that person, but that doesn't mean that if I want to create executive presence that I have to do and be exactly like that person.
Yeah, I mean, that's a real danger, right? Because we learn through osmosis. If you're in an environment with a lot of sharks, you're going to start to act like a shark, right? So the thing you have to ask yourself is, is it worth staying in that environment? Can you actually come up with a different way and an effective way in that environment? Like, can you actually operate in that environment differently and have people respond in the right way? Maybe not. So maybe you need to change environments. But even if you don't, the key is to understand that if you want to have executive presence, which helps you get results, it's all about inspiring confidence. And what's great about this definition is there's no algorithm or formula or one way to inspire confidence. So I can do it with humor. I can do it with threats. I can do it with charm. I can do it with, I don't know, logic.
Love.
I don't know. Yeah, like whatever works for you, right? Like whatever works for you and the other person, you can make it happen. The only thing that matters, it's not what you do, it's as you bring that presence and you do that thing, is it having the reaction where people are like, wow, I think we should continue to follow you because you're going to get the thing done.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny, I would encourage everybody who's live watching us right now or listening to the replay of this to just go back and explore times where really you were that person, right? Like for some reason, I used to say this all the time, is that it's like people just default leadership to me. And I don't know why that is, but it's because I have executive presence. People are like, oh, Tracy can make decisions. Let Tracy make the decisions. And sometimes I have to convince my husband that he's also capable of making decisions, because I'm not going to decide what to have for dinner every night for the rest of my life. I just don't want to do that. But it's like the whole time, right? From being captain of the basketball team to being like randomly the leader of school projects and getting the opportunity to lead projects and departments when I was in corporate, because the CEO would go away and people would just default to me as their backup plan. Like, that's not written anywhere. That's because you have the presence that inspires the confidence in people to go to you.
Well, your example is so spot on. You weren't doing anything, right? You weren't trying to game the system, right? You were just bringing that sort of sense that people, when they're around you, they're like, wow, I feel comfortable that Tracy knows what she's doing, that whether you do or not, right? They feel, right, that you're going to be a good person to bet on. And then when you deliver, it sort of compounds, right? And if you don't deliver, they're like, they reevaluate, right? Mm-hmm. So that's exactly right. So that's why, like, when I try to teach executive presence, it's not communication, appearance, and gravitas. Like what is that, right? Like that's not going to help you, right? Speak with a lower voice, dress up better. Gravitas, I don't even know what that means, right? It's just like, but if you can find a way to be present in that moment to inspire people like, wow, this person really is someone that we should be following, you're golden. That's all you need.
Yeah, absolutely. We could probably keep talking about executive presence for a very long time, but it's Friday and we'll let people have the rest of their day to themselves. So Joe, if people want to learn more about executive presence or more about you and what you do as the connection counselor, where is the best place for them to connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm very active on LinkedIn. That's how you and I thankfully discovered each other. I have a website. I'm redoing it now, but there's a lot of content there. It's called www.connectioncounselor, just one word, .com. And I actually, on Udemy, I have several courses. One is actually on executive presence, specifically for underrepresented professionals, right? The non-Tom Brady's of the world. And then I have another course on thriving. This one's interesting. It's the Thrive Guide for Underrepresented Professionals. And I answer the question, how do you thrive in an environment where your success is still considered an anomaly, right? People don't expect you to succeed, right? And I come up with 7 strategies to really approach the things that are going to happen to you because of people's expectations, rightly or wrongly. So maybe we don't have that problem, Tracy, but maybe if you have like a foreign name, right? People mispronouncing your name and getting defensive when, you correct them. Or let's say you're a woman and people don't think you're tough enough for this C-suite role. How do you convince people that, yeah, I am the right person, right? All these things that maybe if you are represented, right? If leadership looks like you, then it's almost like you don't get any of that, because now all of a sudden more people are sponsoring you, more people are mentoring you, because you know what? You look like our former CEO. You feel like our former CEO. It's got nothing to do necessarily with what you've accomplished. It feels familiar. I don't know why. There's something about this person. Seems very executive, right? Versus someone else, they're like, they're not a culture fit, right? Mm-hmm. They just don't seem to fit. But really all that's going on is we have this expectation, right? I call it implicit leadership bias. Well, this is called implicit leadership bias. We each have an image in our head of what a specific leader should look like for a specific role. And if you don't look like it, you got a problem.
Yeah. Absolutely. And now we need to do an episode on culture fit, because that is going to be a completely different question. I think it's so important though, right? Because it's just when you continually like, I can't even get an opportunity. I've been really lucky because like as a woman, I know lots of people who haven't gotten the type of opportunities I have, and I feel just really grateful for the people who have given me those opportunities, because quite honestly, they haven't all looked like Tom Brady. That would have been dreamy, but like they fit that profile, right? And they have given me opportunities, and I appreciate that. And I'm excited to give back what I can in terms of opportunities to people, because people, they deserve it. People deserve a chance.
And one last point. We love Tom Brady. We want Tom Brady on our team. So Tom is not the problem. The problem is everyone else who thinks Tom's the only star quarterback. What about Juan and Priya and Ali and Tracy and Joe? Why are they not getting the chance to grow into becoming the next Tom? Why? Because we look different? Because we sound different? Because we're not as handsome or tall or fat? You know what I mean? It's like, that's the problem. The problem is not Tom. Tom is wonderful because he's amazing. And we want as many Toms as we can, but we don't want to not include other people who could become Tom just because they don't fit our profile of the next Tom. So that's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's not personal, Tom. We love you.
We love you, Tom. If you would like to comment on this live, that would be super. That would be amazing, actually. Let's just get Tom Brady on this show. Tom, if you are watching this, please contact me. I would love to have you on the show.
Very good. Very good.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Joe, for sharing all of this wonderful insight about executive presence today. If you guys aren't already connected with Joe, please reach out to him. As he mentioned, he has some amazing resources for executive presence to give us all the opportunity to find what our executive presence is, so we can love Tom, but not be Tom, and have all of our spaces. Wonderful. Thank you guys so much for sharing so much in the chat today. I'm getting a weird pop-up, so I can't see the chat anymore, but I appreciate all of you for coming out and sharing your thoughts, especially Eric, Elena, Brian, and Balwinder. You guys had some really amazing contributions to the conversation today, so thank you so much for that. The conversation wouldn't be what it was without your contribution, so thank you for coming. Joe, of course, this conversation wouldn't really have been anything if you weren't here and said, let's talk about executive presence, because this has been very fun, very educational for me, so thank you so much for that. I hope you guys all get connected. I hope you guys all stay in the conversation of executive presence so you can find more of it in your lives. And until next time, permission to do you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, Tracy. Thank you.